Hello, everyone. Eric Rennie here, and welcome to the 135th episode of the Writ Podcast. There are less than 2 weeks to go in the provincial election campaigns in both British Columbia and New Brunswick, and things are officially underway in Saskatchewan. So let's check in on the state of those provincial election campaigns. We're going to start in British Columbia, where voters are going to the polls on October 19th. Richard Zussman is the legislative reporter for Global News in British Columbia, and he's joining me from a bus in Victoria.
No, we're in Burnaby, so we are getting ready to roll with David Eby. It will be another Metro Vancouver day, which is, as you know, Eric, where this election is won and lost. So sitting on the bus, getting ready for what's going to be a busy day.
Okay, well, before we get into just the latest news, I mean, we're already, as I said, several weeks into this campaign. What's been your general take on the state of the race and where it stands right now?
Yeah, it's been an interesting race. It's felt stagnant at times, with an incumbent government, 7 years in power, although David Eby's only been here for nearly 2 years. It's hard to articulate a future vision when you've been doing the job. So he's been struggling a bit to get that momentum. John Rustad has been very aggressive in the way that he has rolled out platform, but it's now coming to the point where people are wondering, well, how do you actually make this happen? Like, what tools do you have here to put in place all of these things that you are committing? And Sonia Furstenau from the Greens has conceded a number of times she's not going to be the premier now. She is focusing in on the ridings in which she believes the Greens have a chance. It's been really interesting because I've never heard this before, I don't think, Eric. She's naming the ridings in essence by name, saying, these are the 7 ridings that we have a chance, which says something to the other 62 candidates that are running for the Greens, where the leader is essence conceded that they don't have any chance of winning there. But it's been an interesting strategy. So it's been negative at times. We're going to see a bombardment of ads. I think we live in a beautiful place here in British Columbia. I think people love to be British Columbians, but when you listen to the tone of the debate, it's depressing at times, about drugs on the streets and people dying and, reopening institutions for people to receive treatment. And, it's not a positive message, but it's also a time where not a lot of people feel very positive. So almost it hits the tone, but following a negative campaign is not as much fun, I guess, as following one where you see sort of positive energy about painting an optimistic future for what we could see in this province.
Yeah, I think you saw that reflected in the debate that was held on Tuesday night, just some of the issues that were being discussed and everything. There was that debate. We're talking the day after. People might be listening to this the day after that. But what stood out to you from that debate between Sonia Furstenau, John Rustad, and David Eby?
Yeah, you mentioned that tone, and you saw it right off the start. Like, in the opening question, John Rustad told a story about on his way to the debate, and he described it as such: I saw someone die. I tried to ask questions about it post-debate to try to understand exactly what he saw. How did he know? He wanted to paint a picture of somebody who had overdosed on the side of the street. He described a paramedic being there alongside him. When he explained it afterward, he said the reason he brought out that anecdote is he wanted to reflect what he's hearing from people around the fact that they feel unsafe, they feel uncomfortable, and that these people who are dying need help. They need treatment. They need, in some cases, to be in facilities to receive mental health support. But it was a grim way to start the debate, and the tone didn't change much. Sonia Furstenau, Green Party leader, has done this before. She did in 2020. She was confident then. She was confident again on Tuesday night. She painted a more optimistic version, but it was almost an unrealistic version of the province, and tried to explain how she would put in place these significant changes, in essence, change the way we think about how we measure success in this province. It's largely been driven anywhere in this country, and pretty much most places in the world, around economics, around GDP, around deficits, around surpluses. She believes we should fundamentally rethink that and talk about well-being. And it's something that they see in Iceland and in parts of Germany and New Zealand, and she would like to apply it here. And she tried to paint that picture. So it was interesting to parse that out to get an understanding of those sort of strategies. And for David Eby, it was really about, stay steady, be confident. And he did a lot of that. People are still frustrated with what life is like here. That wasn't going to change no matter what he said in a debate. But we had a radio debate last week where he was interrupting John Rustad quite a bit. He was very aggressive. That tone changed. His plan was more, allow them to come to me, and then respond, defend my record, and explain what we need to do next. And I think he executed that largely.
And for John Rustad, it would have been an introduction for a lot of British Columbians. Obviously, they've seen him a lot more over the last while than they would have been before. But this might have been the first time for a lot of British Columbians that they sat down and listened to him talk for 2 hours. How did he do?
So it was a bit of a struggle for him. Like David Eby, he didn't have to go through a leadership. He hasn't had to go through these debates. Yes, he's debated in the legislature for a long time, but not at this sort of pace and not this type of intensity. And it came off negative at times. He did execute some issues that he really wanted to get through. So one of the debate points here has been the Conservative first platform piece they released months ago was on healthcare. There was one line in that document that was a reflection around GDP compared to healthcare. So the NDP did the math and they said, oh, well, if this is what he actually wants to spend in terms of GDP, they'll cut the health budget by $4 billion. And John Rustad has said repeatedly that's not true. There's ads running that says he's going to cut $4 billion in the budget. So with the biggest audience before him, he made it very clear we are going to expand the healthcare budget by, I believe I remember, $3.6 billion over a number of years. So it was trying to sort of set the record straight on a key election issue. Beyond that, he looked at times, he didn't have that sort of go for the jugular approach that you see in Pierre Poilievre. I think it's well known at this point that the Conservatives here are trying to copy the blueprint of the success that Pierre Poilievre has felt on the campaign trail. But this election campaign is obviously going first. So there's a little bit of a litmus test. John Rustad doesn't have those same skills that Pierre Poilievre does. You know this, Eric. You've watched him. When Poilievre sees an opportunity with an opponent, largely Justin Trudeau, he seizes. He attacks and he does not let go until he believes that battle is won. John Rustad doesn't have that same gut reaction, that same instinct to do that. And you saw that a bit in the debate. He tried at times to engage, to approach, but he wasn't able to get all the way there to deliver, as we describe it, that knockout punch that you have at times seen in debates that the media talks about, that leads the cycle for days. We didn't see that. I think this is one of those debates, Eric, honestly. It's done. We'll move on. We'll start focusing on the other things of the campaign. I'm not convinced there's going to be any lingering moments here.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting you say how John Rustad is, taking from the playbook from Pierre Poilievre. Heard him yesterday on the debate talk about common sense solutions or common sense, using that terminology. So clearly the same words, but as you said, not exactly the same delivery. John Rustad is a bit more of less of a fiery personality. Let's just put it that way.
Yep.
For the Conservatives, we'll get to the NDP in a second, but for the Conservatives, one of the big questions going into the campaign was, do they have an organization? This is more or less a party that was a fringe party a year or two ago, now is vying for government, and in a lot of polls is in front of the NDP. Do you see the sign that they have the organization to back that up?
So we're seeing lots of people. I think if you stood at the airport with a sign that said BC Conservative, a lot of people would come to you. They're arriving from other places in the country to go work on the campaign. That helps centrally, but on the ground, I'm not so sure. I've been spending a lot of time talking to candidates. It is unclear what the organization is like for the Conservatives on the ground. They don't have those years of data around vote ID. It's really interesting, though. I spoke to a longtime MLA who said the sense that they are getting at the door is it's much harder to ID vote. And, we may see this in the federal election. It's probably part of a larger trend that with these doorbells where people can see out, people are less willing to come to the door. And we know the change that has happened with phones. And so if they don't recognize you, they're not going to come outside. They're not going to answer the phone. So it's much harder to ID vote. And this is just anecdotal. But this person has been campaigning a long time. They said when they used to campaign, they could pretty much roughly ID between 50 and 60% of a poll. Now it's closer to 10%. So that leads to the question of how big a difference will it actually make around ground game? Or is it really this sort of air game, undercurrent? People see what they like. They don't engage with a candidate. They don't engage with a party. And then they just show up and vote. And that would dramatically change things. It would take that factor out of the ground game. So my sense is, I guess, the Conservatives don't have as tough a big a ground game, obviously, as the NDP. They have some operatives that are coming in to do big central campaign stuff. That their ads have looked really slick. Their air war has looked slick. Their tour has looked strong at times, very impactful event a few days ago at Riverview Hospital, where they announced they want to move. This is a facility that was closed that provides mental health treatment. It was closed partly because of the treatment of patients, and it's an old, decrepit building on First Nations land. All of those things factored in. But Rustad had a family with him, very emotional himself, emotional to family, and that was good, effective work by the tour to articulate an issue that people are feeling here around the drug crisis and then showing it to everyday British Columbians.
All right, so the NDP is the incumbent government. They have lots more money. They have lots more resources. They have 2 election wins, 1.5, we'll say that, under their belt.
1 and a draw.
2017. Yeah, 1 and an asterisk. How is their campaign unfolding? Is it going according to plan? What have they been trying to hit as their main message?
Yeah, I think largely to plan. It is a way more aggressive campaign than the Conservatives. The NDP campaign is everywhere. I was looking at my list this morning about the ridings that have been visited, and I think based on public events, it's almost double the NDP has hit compared to the Conservatives. Conservatives have been doing some events that aren't on the public schedule, so that number may be higher, but the NDP is being very aggressive. They are out in public. They are doing a lot of different types of events, speeches, smaller rallies, Burma shaves, announcements, almost every single day. Fully costed platform is out, so EB is now sort of executing, look, our plan is out, and this is what this will mean for British Columbians, while sprinkling in a few different new things every day. And the key will be the advance polls open tomorrow, on Thursday. And it will be about engaging the voter to get them going. So I think he's largely executing the plan. I think he is who a lot of people thought he was going to be. There was some hope, I think, from New Democrats who'd be a little bit more fiery, a little bit more anecdotal, personal. Evie has always struggled to get to that space, but he is hitting the policy notes and he is showcasing who he is and defending largely the things that he has put in place over the last 22 months.
All right, so there are 10 days to go as of when we're recording. The election is going to be on a Saturday, which is a bit of a unique thing in Canada. Yeah. Most elections are not on Saturdays. There's not that much time to go. The polls we've seen usually have the Greens somewhere around 10%, and both the NDP and the Conservatives somewhere between 40, 45, not really seeing any trend developing if one party's taking off or another. So there's a little bit more than a week to go. How is this election going to be decided? What's going to be the thing that really clinches this outcome?
Yeah, I think that's what makes close elections fun is you just don't know, right? Anything could really happen. Like clearly it's the classic, air game combined with pulling out the vote and trying to get your ID voter there. But based on what I said earlier, the struggle with voting ID has made that a little bit more problematic. So I think that ultimately it's going to come down to, how people feel where they're at. The Conservatives want to tell you your life is way worse now than it was 7 years ago. The New Democrats want to say, I feel your pain. I'm struggling too. But that we can do better, and we're already starting to see results from things the New Democrats are doing. So it's that sort of messaging and how it lands with people, and that's what I've struggled to understand. The demos to watch, women and young people. We've seen in BC, similar to the federal side, this surge of young people that say they'd like to vote Conservative. Well, there was a recent poll that came out from Leger that showed the Conservatives down almost 10 points with young people. Same with women. If those trends continue, David Eby wins the election. But if the Conservatives are able to keep those numbers up with young people who are mainly concerned about affordability, healthcare, less healthcare, more affordability, more housing, cost of living, and then also access around public safety, if the Conservatives could keep that vote, if that isn't really hemorrhaging, then he has a chance. And this is a party that was at 2%, Eric, now, and in some polls is sitting as high as 44 or 45. It is an incredible rise, but we will see if they can get this thing over the finish line.
Yeah, still too close to call, so it's going to be
very.
A lot of fun
it is so, Eric, it is so close. It's fascinating to watch some of the models, and as you've done this a long time, and your friends at 338 had this incredible model, 46-46-1. My brain almost broke just looking at the model, Eric. Like, I'm not sure how I think any of us would process if that was the result, that one Green could sort of split these votes, but models are models. and the ones who get to decide are the voters. So we'll see. But that's how close it could be. And the variance of models has been wild, too, based on polls every day. So it is really too close to call and hard to predict.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Richard. And another day on the bus for you. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure as always. Thanks, Eric.
The election in New Brunswick is also coming down to the wire. Voters will be going to the polls on October 21st. So joining me to break down where this campaign is going is Jacques Poitras. He's the provincial affairs reporter for the CBC in New Brunswick and joins me from Fredericton. Hi, Jacques.
Hello.
So before we get into sort of just the latest things, we're now nearing the end of this campaign. We're certainly past the halfway mark. What's your take on where this race stands right now?
A lot of people are talking about the Liberals having the edge, but no one is really certain. I mean, there's a feeling that the Liberals have done a good campaign. There was a Main Street poll that found most respondents felt that Susan Holt, the Liberal leader, won the debate, the CBC debate that happened on the 25th by a fairly sizable margin. And that poll also showed that about 40% of respondents watched the debate either live or online after. So there's been anecdotal signs that that the Liberals are doing okay. But because of the vote inefficiency issue in the past, and because there are a lot of very close races, and because one of the incumbent PC government's signature issues, Policy 713, has been shown in another Main Street poll to actually be quite popular. No one's betting anything more than a coffee on this yet.
Yeah, I think that's what's really fascinating about this race is that, in BC it's really close, but you got lots of polls. In Manitoba, could be close. We don't have a lot of polls to really know for certain, and there's lots of other factors that make it a bit complicated and hard to predict. How would you assess how these campaigns have unfolded for each of the parties, for the Liberals and the PCs? Is it going according to plan? What's working for them? What's not really working for them?
The PCs have made a decision. This is sort of the incumbent premier's ethos, really, is to not promise a lot, and it's created a situation where he doesn't have a lot to sort of put in the window every day. The Liberals have just continued with this relentless emphasis on cost of living and healthcare, and they're making promises every day. In fact, they're starting to, I wouldn't say recycle, but unpack one of their signature promises, which is the creation of more primary care clinics, community primary care clinics around the province. And they put out a number, and they put out roughly where they'd be, and then they said the first 4 will be in these places in the first year of a Liberal government. And now, lo and behold, on the campaign trail, they're going to different places and saying, well, gee, our local candidate has done some homework here, and lo and behold, we think we can put one here as well. And so they did that in Woodstock, and then they did it in Quispamsis, which is the incumbent premier's riding, Blaine Higgs's riding. So they've put out the main promises, and now they're elaborating and taking pieces of them and sprinkling them around the province. The PCs, Blaine Higgs is in northern New Brunswick for 4 days this week, which is not exactly fertile territory for the party. They've been very unpopular there, the Francophone North. Might be a question about the return on investment for that amount of time to that region. The Liberal leader, Susan Holt, has really been circulating in those key battlegrounds that we talked about last time. This week she's been in Miramichi, and she's going to be in Moncton, St. John, and Fredericton. And those 3 large cities in the south in particular are, everyone sort of agrees that's where the election will be decided. The Green Party leader, David Kuhn, has been out and about, but he has been in the ridings of his 2 candidates who were MLAs in the last legislature and in his own Fredericton area a lot. So you might surmise that he's on defense more than really trying to expand the map.
On the Green campaign, is it a localized campaign or is it a provincial campaign?
Well, the Greens have a lot of interesting candidates, and they're calling it a provincial campaign. And when they released their platform today, they said, a Green government would do this. But they've also been drawn into this discussion about, what happens if there's no majority and who would they support. So I think they are, to some extent, acknowledging that their best shot at having an influence on government policy might be as a kingmaker. Another thing that's come up, if I can talk about it for a minute, is the costing of the three platforms has turned into a really interesting subplot in this election, because the PCs have promised to cut the provincial sales tax by 2 points. Blaine Higgs hasn't been very clear on how he would give up all that revenue and still balance the budget without cutting anything. He said, well, we'll manage better and we'll generate enough growth to overcome the shortfall. The Liberals then put out a platform that said, they say they won't cut the HST, but they seem to have double counted the revenue from the Higgs cut into their numbers. They took that amount. They said, well, this is revenue because we're not going to cut it. They added it to the existing government revenue projections, which already included the full 15% sales tax. So then they've had to explain that. And today, the Green Party leader unveiled his platform and essentially acknowledged that some of the things he's promising, he can't cost them because there's too many sort of unknown factors. So all three. And that he would be willing to run deficits for a couple of years to spend a lot of money on recruiting healthcare workers and so on. So all three parties have sort of been in the situation where they can't quite say or add up what their promises would cost and whether they would stay in the black in their budgets.
Well, we know that opposition parties, once they do get into government, suddenly discover that the financial situation was not as they expected, and
David Kuhn, the Green leader, did sort of cop to that possibility, whereas the Liberals have not, and of course the PC incumbents know exactly what the books are. So
presumably they do, yeah. Blaine Higgs, you mentioned that Susan Holt was seen as the debate winner. There was supposed to be another debate, but it doesn't seem like Blaine Higgs is going to be there. What's going on with that? As
we're recording on Wednesday, Rogers has a debate organized for tonight, and you're right, the PC leader isn't there, and I believe the Liberals are going to attend, the Greens are going to attend, and I believe the NDP are going to attend as well, but the PC leader is not going to attend. And so without the incumbent government represented at the debate, I'm not sure how interesting a debate it will be. Maybe the Liberals and Greens can sort out some of the details of this purported coalition agreement they're secretly working on.
All right, so there's been lots of focus on healthcare in this campaign. We've seen, in an election like in Manitoba, that was, and in Nova Scotia, that those were real issues that was able to defeat an incumbent government. How is it playing out in this one?
It is certainly the top issue, and it's the issue that all candidates, all parties say they're hearing about a lot. One other aspect of that Main Street poll I mentioned that was very interesting is the Liberals have put out the number that there's 180,000 New Brunswickers without access to primary care, and they and the PCs have said that number is just not true. If you look at some of the new services they've created, like these online primary care things or these walk-in clinics, access points, that so many thousand people have been able to use those. But the Liberals have defended that estimate based on a survey by a provincial health council last year that found that 21% of New Brunswickers didn't have access to primary care. Well, in this Main Street poll that just came out this week, Main Street asked people, do you have a family doctor? And the numbers were exactly the same as that study based on 2023 data. So that has kind of validated to some extent this Liberal number. The poll also said, though, that 60% of respondents have used some of these new alternate access points to primary care. So people are using some of the things the Higgs government came up with, but the Liberals seem to be right about the number of people who don't have access to primary care. So I guess both parties are kind of getting some traction out of that poll, but it was an interesting development to see the Main Street number in a survey done just in the last week track perfectly with this study that was done a year ago.
What's your gut take right now? I know this is a hard one to answer maybe, but Is an issue like healthcare going to decide the election, or is it going to be another question of just leadership, whether people like the options on the table? Like, what is going to decide the outcome of this? Because it is, as we've been discussing, it seems pretty close. So it seems like it could be anything that could make the difference. Yeah,
it's hard to say. I mean, healthcare is definitely in the mix. I'm not sure it's helpful for the PCs to be saying, well, it's not exactly 180,000 people who don't have doctors, because if you don't have a doctor, you don't care about the number, you just care about yourself. Cost of living is very tangible as an issue, and that HST cut, I'm sure, is on some voters' minds. And then there are the intangibles. Blaine Higgs said towards the tail end of our CBC debate, this isn't about whether you like me personally, it's about the plan. So maybe an acknowledgement there that he's not like the warmest, fuzziest guy. But I think all of those are in the mix, and it's hard to say. But clearly, when 21% of people say they don't have access to a doctor or to primary care, that's significant.
Do you get the sense of which party feels like they have this, or are they as clueless as us as to who can actually win?
Again, Liberals are starting to seem like they're a little bullish, but I don't think they want to take anything for granted, because the margins could be so tight that they don't want to take anything for granted at this point. And the PCs are not out of it by any stretch. It is really. I mean, in past elections I've covered, often it's like this week, maybe a couple more days from now, like the 10 days to go mark, where if there's going to be a wave, you start to sense it, or if one party's sort of running away with it, you start to feel it. I certainly can think of elections where I've had that feeling just as a journalist, but who knows? It might be up in the air until the polls close on the 21st.
Okay, and just one last thing before we go. 3 ridings to watch on election night, because as we said in past campaigns, one riding was enough to decide the outcome. Give me 3. What are the ones to look at?
Well, I mean, there's 10 or 12 that I could pick from, particularly from around the 3 largest cities. So almost at random, I've got Fredericton South Silverwood, which part of it was the Green leaders riding in the last legislature. The newly configured riding has a PC history, or a solid PC vote, but it's where the Liberal leader is running. And so that's one of them, Fredericton South Silverwood. St. John Portland Simons is one of the ridings in St. John that, if the Liberals are going to get to 25, they need to flip some PC seats. They need something in St. John. There's a few that they're already in healthy shape in St. John Harbour, but St. John Portland Simons was held by Trevor Holder for 25 years. He was one of the PC cabinet ministers who voted against Blaine Higgs on the gender identity policy last year, quit the cabinet, issued a scathing statement about Higgs's leadership style, and opted not to run again. So that was his riding solid for 25 years. And now the former CEO of a health authority that Higgs fired is running there for the Liberals. So that is one to watch for sure. A lot of drama there. Moncton is the big battleground. There's 3 or 4 seats that are interesting there. I'm just going to say Moncton South because it's the riding where I grew up, and it does tend to go back and forth, Liberal and PC, with whoever wins the election a lot of the time. And there's a popular incumbent PC cabinet minister there up against a young woman, fluently bilingual, health professor at the University of Moncton. So 2 sort of strong, capable candidates there. And if Moncton South goes, then it probably indicates a Liberal win. So those are 3, but there's 7 or 8 more we could talk about.
Yeah, and the added, we've mentioned the vote inefficiency. The added complication of this is that if the Liberals are ahead in the polls by 5-7 points, which seems to be the case in the last surveys we saw, in the past that might not have been good enough. Maybe it's good enough this time if the Liberals have made some gains in the Anglophone South. There's just a lot of these kinds of intangibles and unknowns that are going into Election Day.
Yeah, well, I mean, your last projection had them at 25, or your current projection had them at 25 seats, which is just one, a bare majority with no room to maneuver whatsoever. So, and that's with, a couple of polls that have shown them with decent leads in the popular vote. So I think it's really, potentially anyway, going to be, riding by riding, a few votes here and there. I mean, I remember the famous 2003 election when it was 28 PCs, 26 Liberals, and one New Democrat, and one of those PC seats was decided by 16 votes. So can you imagine that on election night this month?
Well, the elections have been getting pretty close. Last one wasn't so close, or at least it didn't seem that way, but maybe if we go back into the history, a close election being decided by a couple seats is not really out of the norm for New Brunswick. So we'll see what's going to happen in these last few days. It's about a week and a half until Election Day, so it's really going to come down to the wire. And Jacques, I know you're really busy, so I appreciate you joining me on the podcast this week.
All right, thanks a lot.
Saskatchewan goes to the polls on October 28th. There, the incumbent Sask Party government is facing a stiff challenge from the NDP. Could be one of the closest elections we've seen in Saskatchewan in decades. Adam Hunter is the provincial affairs reporter for the CBC in Saskatchewan and joins me from Regina. Hey, Adam.
Hi, Eric.
It's just a week over this into this campaign now. This was the late bloomer of the three provincial campaigns across the country. What struck you so far from the opening days of this campaign?
I think even though the election was called on October 1st, the pre-campaigning was as much as we've seen, and definitely more than 2020 because of the pandemic. So the NDP was almost having an announcement a day, a platform announcement a day. So a lot of their promises and the things that they've pitched since then, since the election call, have been not their major, like platform announcements. Things like adding, $1 billion here in healthcare, $2 billion into education over 4 years, these really splashy spending promises to what they say fix problems in healthcare and education. The Saskatchewan Party, while they before the election was called, was just crisscrossing the country, as I know we see in other provinces and even in federal politics, where right before the writ drops, you have the opportunity to reestablish some of the promises you've made, re-announce hospital plans, re-announce school plans, re-announce spending plans. So they'd spent a lot of the sort of pre-campaign doing that. And their promises over the last little while have been not as splashy, admittedly, by leader Scott Moe. He's saying, we want to make sure this is affordable, sustainable promises into the future. So just a sprinkling of different tax credits, adding on to programs that have already been established, popular things that there's uptake on, things like grad retention, bonuses for people who decide to spend and work after graduation in Saskatchewan. That's a popular program that's been around for a while. They're adding to that. So that's just an example of some of the promises the Saskatchewan Party has made. Most of it has been focused on what they're calling affordability promises, just, as I said, adding to established programs. Where the NDP made not a huge splash, let's say, but more of a promise on cutting the gas tax, which has happened in other provinces. They said they'll suspend that for 6 months as soon as they are elected, if they are elected. Also removing the PST on things like children's clothes and some grocery items, which is something that was expanded by the Saskatchewan Party a few years ago. So those are a couple of their affordability promises. Lots of promises, lots of rhetoric on healthcare, education. Last week there was quite a big nurses rally at the legislature where nurses shared their concerns about the healthcare system in the province. Carla Beck did attend that rally and spoke afterwards. Nurses, teachers in Saskatchewan have been very outspoken about people getting out to vote. We've also had the RCMP union come out in Saskatchewan and tell people to vote. That there's a pitch for a marshal's service here, which would supplement some policing in areas of the province that the Saskatchewan Party is committed to. Carla Beck saying that she would scrap that plan. It's about $20 million off the bat and put that money into hiring officers and then mental health and addictions, whereas the Saskatchewan Party, of course, is committed to that plan. So subtle differences coming out in the first few days, Eric, and not expecting a lot of big splashes in this campaign. I think the party's kind of foreshadowed where they were at for the last 6 or 8 months, knowing this. We had a fixed election date. There wasn't going to be an early election call. And so that, set the table pretty nicely for those of us that have to follow it and keep track of everything.
You said there are not a lot of, subtle differences between the two. Do you see any subtle or otherwise differences in just the organizational strength, the flashiness, just the campaigning side between the Sask Party and the NDP?
I think over that, I've talked to a few people about this. Over the last couple of elections, there's maybe been less organization in the NDP, less cohesion, let's say. Carla Beck seems to have brought her team together. She has definitely more momentum, I think you can tell, than Ryan Malley did 4 years ago. Part of that is I think just, she's more familiar. She's a different style of leader. Not to criticize Ryan Malley, but she does have a bit more buy-in from her caucus colleagues, it seems like, than Ryan Malley may have had. And right now she's letting a lot of those, caucus colleagues and those candidates speak during the campaign here. They're having multiple events a day all over the province, not just sort of centered by Beck. Beck is, of course, holding her daily news conferences in different parts of the province, but she's sending, Nicole Sarr, who's an experienced MLA, out to, today she's in Yorkton, and then to Melville, which are a couple of communities that the NDP is not expected to win, but they're trying to make inroads, trying to grow their constituency support. So there's maybe a bit more organization on the ground there. There's after 17 years in government, the Saskatchewan Party is probably not going to have the same level of enthusiasm from its volunteers, and as one political scientist put it to me, the rocks in their backpack, are kind of just adding up, because there's not maybe one scandal, but there's just things that people have a grievance over time that add up. There's also a huge turnover in the Saskatchewan Party as far as candidates go, with experienced cabinet ministers. And we've talked about this in the past, but household names here in Saskatchewan really who aren't running again, and that changes the dynamic of the campaign, I think, because in some of those constituencies, like in Saskatoon, where you don't have Gord Wine or Don Morgan running, you may have the NDP feeling like after a couple of elections where they had no chance in those areas, that they maybe do have a chance because they're running against someone who's new to politics, and the NDP maybe didn't run a campaign there very aggressively in the past, or maybe they helicoptered in a candidate. Maybe they think they have a chance to win in some of those areas, be more competitive. And the momentum that we've seen in the polls, Eric, in Regina and Saskatoon specifically, which is where most people, most of the pundits think that the NDP could make some ground up, and have to make some ground up, honestly, if they're going to be more of a threat to the Saskatchewan Party. They have to make inroads in Saskatoon and Regina, and specifically in suburban ridings in those areas. And they're polling really well in Regina and Saskatoon, and I think they feel very confident. Scott Moe spent his first 2 days of the campaign in Saskatoon, which I think should be telling. He spent a few days last week in Regina. Both Carla Beck and Scott Moe were in Moose Jaw over the weekend, which is another area that it could be in play. They both spent time in Prince Albert, which is another smaller city that could be in play. And interestingly enough, Scott Moe this week was in North Battleford, which is the constituency of the who was, before the government was dissolved, the education minister, Jeremy Cockrell, who's a one-term MLA. Not expecting Scott Moe to be in North Battleford necessarily. What the announcement they made wasn't specific to North Battleford, but we always keep an eye on that, right? Where the candidates are going, where they're spending their time, because the campaign's so short. And in Saskatchewan, this time around, there's a voting week, which is something they've done for the first time. In the past, there's been a few days of advance polls, but actually the first day that people can vote in person is October 22nd. So when you're thinking about a 27-day campaign or a 28-day campaign, it's really more of a 3-week campaign. It's kind of a sprint, which I think is the reason why there's so much time spent pre-campaign on making announcements, putting platforms out, because right now there's just a lot of FaceTime, a lot of door knocking, things like that have to happen. So I think, we're paying attention to where they're going, where they're spending their time. Scott Moe and Carla Beck are in Saskatoon again today, so that's the place they've spent the most time. And I think it makes sense. There's a lot of turnover in seats there. The NDP have 5 incumbents in Saskatoon. They have 7 in Regina, so they're a bit safer, let's say, in Regina. And I know we've talked about this as well. There's a new map this time, and so that changes the dynamic a little bit. And talking to the parties, there is a little bit of an adjustment there, because certain incumbents who've been around for a while are now having to audition for brand new voters in brand new areas because of that changing map.
One of the big questions I have right now, there haven't been, at least as of recording, any polls that have been conducted since the writ drop, or at least those that have been published. We did have two polls that came out just before the election. One had the Sask Party leading by about 10 points, which is a lot less than the margin of victory they had last time. But another poll had the NDP ahead by 1 point. I'm not going to get you to weigh in on which is correct, but I am curious, if you get a sense from the parties, are they running like this is a 10-point Sask Party lead or a 1-point NDP lead?
I don't think the Sask Party would ever admit that they're running like they're behind. I don't think they see it that way. I think there's sort of an understanding they will not gain seats this time around. To give people a quick history, 9 seats, 10 seats, 13 seats. That's the last 3 elections for the NDP in a 61-seat legislature. So they were blown out 3 straight elections. And there was some optimism from the NDP camp last time around that they were going to get into the 20s. I didn't see that as being a possibility, and it turns out they weren't really close to that, even in, when they had to do some recounts that, they didn't really get in that neighborhood. So this time around, I think there is an acceptance from the Saskatchewan Party, although they'll never come out and admit to it, that they're going to lose some seats, specifically in Regina and Saskatoon. How many? That's the million-dollar question. And as I mentioned earlier, Moose Jaw, Prince Albert being in play. The northern seats have traditionally gone to the NDP, but the Sask Party did pick up Athabasca in the last by-election, which led to Ryan Miley stepping down because that was seen as one of the safest seats for the NDP. Those northern seats are really hard to predict, and so I think that's I'll be interested to see if the leaders go up there during the campaign. They haven't been up there as far as I know during the campaign. I'm certain actually neither of them have been there. Beck was there just briefly before the campaign started, but the NDP is definitely operating on, they have momentum. They have momentum like they haven't seen in the last few elections. Now, could that get them to the mid-20s? I think they would probably take that. Obviously, they're talking like they want to form government, but they have to have a lot of things, as you know, Eric, break in their favor, which is a sweep in Regina and Saskatoon, perhaps a sweep in Prince Albert and Moose Jaw, and a sweep in the north. And that edges it for them, really. And that'll be a tall order. Even with redistribution, looking at the numbers, the suburban seats in Regina and Saskatoon still are very solidly Saskatchewan Party. They won some of those seats by, I think you can correct me, 1,800, 1,500 votes. That's a big turnaround for the NDP to make up. So I think they are kind of banking on, long time, and they've said this, long-time Sask Party voters, people have voted for them in multiple elections, or maybe a couple of elections, saying, I'm going to change my vote to the NDP. That's how upset or disappointed I am, or I just think there needs to be a change. And a lot of people staying home that are Sask Party supporters or voters in the past. The Sask Party and the NDP haven't spent really any time in quote-unquote rural Saskatchewan. I mentioned NDPs in Yorkton and Melville. We're seeing Scott Moe, I mentioned, go to North Battleford. Those are smaller centers. But a lot of those seats have been, I think, conceded by the NDP, although they're trying to sell themselves as a party for everyone. Carla Beck brands herself as a farm girl from Lang, Saskatchewan, which is a small community just outside of Regina. Scott Moe is from Shellbrook. He tries to, paint himself as, the small town guy as well. So there is always that, framing of who you are, the identity thing that they're trying to appeal to everyone. And the other dynamic that's happening this time around that wasn't present as present in the last election is there's a presence of a right party that's calling themselves the true conservative voice for Saskatchewan, and the Sask United Party that's a brand new party. This will be their first general election they ran in. They were competitive in a by-election last year in Lumsden Morse, which is riding west of the city, and they're pitching very hard on things like a drastic cut to the PST and other things that are not on the Sask Party's radar, something they're not going to do, and not even the NDP is pitching for that. And I'll be really interested to see if they can make a breakthrough, like we saw the Buffalo Party make a bit of a breakthrough for their first time running in the last election. The Buffalo Party is running some candidates as well in this election. They're also fighting for some of that airspace on the right of the Sask Party with the Sask United Party. So that's kind of the unknown factor. Like, will they play a spoiler? Can they play a spoiler? They're not running in every constituency. So there's certain areas where I know the NDP is happy that they're running. They're running in Saskatoon Southeast, which is Don Morgan, the Sask Party's old seat, and Greg Burkich is running there, who is a long-time former Saskatchewan Party MLA who retired to temporary retirement from politics, I guess, and has been very outspoken in his criticism of Scott Moe. And so that's a place where maybe the Sask United Party is trying to make a splash and where it could help the NDP.
Well, we'll see how things are going to unfold. As you said, there's still 2 weeks before that week of voting starts. I'm curious how many people will be voting in the early part of that week versus the actual last day. I don't know. Maybe old habits die hard for people, but we'll see. So we'll have another chance to chat again. And hopefully we'll get some more polls out of Saskatchewan so we can get a better idea of what is exactly going on.
Yes, we would love to see it. That would be fantastic for us here covering it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Adam, and good luck on the rest of the campaign.
Thanks, Eric.